Just on time for the sirens. Philosophies and mytho-speculations for an emergency age. Okay, so today is class 14 of Radical Mytho-Speculation. And as we talked about last week, Brian and I are each going to present our basically our best effort at a mytho-speculative meta-narrative, if you don't mind those big words, but they're kind of the exact right words, mytho-speculative meta-narrative, that each of us will each have our own. Obviously, they'll overlap, but they'll also be quite distinct, representing the fact that we're two different human beings with different, not only different disciplines, but different sensibilities, and we'd be pretty much in contradiction to what I suspect is both of our visions if we had the identical ones, because the whole idea, or at least part of the whole idea, is a kind of individuating flowering of every, we need multiple perspectives, and it takes multiple human beings to be contributing their pieces to the bigger puzzle. So we'll each do that today, respond to each other, open up to discussion with you. And then tomorrow, all of you who have a desire to, give your thoughts, say up to 5 minutes each. I know it's a more compact version compared with what we're doing, but that may be an advantage to you too. And none of you have to do that. It's completely optional. It's the same thing with those who are online, who will be doing it either in the Zoom session, our final Zoom session, which is a week from tonight, or they can post online either as a little video clip up to 5 minutes or writing it out. All those are options, and again, they are options. The only thing that's required is that formidable final exam that I gave you. So, at this point, how are we doing, Chad? Okay, no rush from my point of view. You guys can hear me okay without any amplification. So, at this point, you'll have hopefully read the epilogue of Passion of the Western Mind, the last reading assignment of the term, and that basically set out my best attempt at a meta-narrative headlines, let's say, as of 1989, which was 30 years ago. Kind of appropriate Saturn return moment here. So I won't repeat that as you've just read it, but it's, in many ways, it's embedded in what I'll say today. But what I'll say today reflects a little more the subsequent 30 years of my thinking about this and constantly rethinking and refining. Here, the reason I said amplifying was both in the Jungian sense that you, in depth psychology, you do amplification when you're looking at, a dream image or some expression of the unconscious. You amplify by looking at cultural resonances, things from different works of art, mythologies, free associations that come up that amplify the initial image, but are in a sense representative of the creative unconscious, giving you more insight into the original image. And in many ways, that's what I think we all do all the time when we're thinking about our world, our vision, our worldview, etc. We're constantly, caressing the divine detail, as Nabokov said. It's when you write a sentence and it moves into a paragraph and then it moves into a chapter or a book. It's amazing how one idea, one sentence, can be the hint that the deep psyche is giving us that could turn out to be one's life work. I mean, I think of there's a famous example of Tolkien where it just one little sentence came to him with an image of a hobbit, which he didn't even know what it was. I think going into a hole or something like that, into his home or something, and that was the beginning of this enormous paracosm of Lord of the Rings and so forth. So, but I actually said amplification because we were putting on the microphone. So what I'm doing today is, after 30 years co-teaching with people like Brian and Sean and Robert and Charlene Spretnak and attending seems like 1,000 conferences and 10,000 lectures and so forth. You're just constantly assimilating more and more and refining and deepening and revising. So I want to start with what I think any adequate philosophy of history, or which is another way of saying a mythospeculative meta-narrative, what I think it must address. I mean, some of the, from my point of view, the requirements for an adequate vision of history, of evolution. Some of these are familiar to us very much from the whole course. I mean, for example, I think we have to be able to get a handle on why the modern mind and the modern self, which is so intrinsic to each of us and to our entire civilization, and in many ways, many features of the modern identity and sensibility are very precious to us. And yet how this modern sensibility has managed to botch, apparently, the Earth's evolutionary process so catastrophically. We have to be able to address that. We have to get a handle on why the most intellectually confident mindset in history, the modern, would today and over the last, I would say, 100 years, a little more than that, been actually in some ways more than even 2-3 centuries, but particularly in the last 100 years and even more in the last 50 and 20 years, why it has, in a sense, taken such pleasure and been so absorbed in and brought forth on virtually every front a systematic takedown of the human being in the larger scheme of things. That's a kind of interesting paradox to assimilate. And also, I think we need to figure out why so much of the modern and later modern project is against anthropocentrism, like Stephen Jay Gould, for example, or much of modern science, like just whether it's the Darwinian evolutionary theory or the Copernican or the Hubble's opening up of the vast cosmic vistas, or many other, really on virtually every front in academia, there is a modern rationality, which is carrying the de-anthropocentric project, is in crucial respects more anthropocentric than the primordial or tribal or indigenous worldviews that it regards as being hopelessly anthropocentric, which I don't think is actually the case. In other words, they think, well, the modern mind is sophisticated because we realize we're not the center of the universe. And all previous worldviews and religious perspectives and tribal worldviews were naive. They thought everything was in some sense revolving around us, and that's we need to be able to unpack that, which I would like to do. We need to be able to understand why and how the Copernican revolution provided such a pivotal, transforming, crucial cosmological metastructure that in some sense summed up all of ancient and medieval cosmological thought and built on it, and then overcame it, destroyed that universe, and brought forth another one, so that in some sense everything comes through almost like a perinatal crucible of the Copernican revolution at the dawn of the modern age, and then so much that unfolds from that can be seen, whether it's Darwin or Hubble or psychoanalysis or whatever, unfolds from that moment. Why did modernity arise from a deeply Christian civilization? The Christian European culture of the Renaissance, Reformation, Scientific Revolution. And we need to be able to grasp more of the nature of the postmodern. In many of the ways I talked about last week. The fact that, for example, you have one part of the postmodern that's just seeing we live in a meaningless universe, and so there's a kind of implosion on the Cartesian self, which has been decentered and minusculized and radically diminished, and the meaninglessness or disenchantment of the cosmos implodes on that self, so that we too, human beings, are just disenchanted. But at the same time, another part of the postmodern is seeing that everything that we see out here is shaped by our subjective structures that are constantly changing and are local to our particular province in the earth, in our particular community, social linguistic communities, our psychology, our gender, et cetera, and that we are always seeing through that lens, and we don't really have a grasp of things as they are. So you basically have that combination of a meaningless universe imploding on us and an unknowable universe at the same time, which is actually a contradiction that is sometimes not noted. And then more recent postmodern developments that are recognizing the participatory nature of that, how and that's what this kind of recursive loop is. Like, our worldviews help create the world, and we're in a relationship with the world, and it's the relationship that is constantly evolving, and a live option within the pleroma of worldviews is an enchanted worldview. Another live option is a disenchanted worldview. And so that's why I have some of these recursive arrows kind of getting into an enchanted world perspective, while others are in a disenchanted. So we need to somehow get a handle on that. And get a sense for the evolution of the God image and of the divine from these, go back to the primal that is, I kind of got overlapped here by the the postmodern, but the archaic, and that image of the divine starting to transcend, and then utterly, but very socially compact cosmology in a hierarchy, and then the utterly transcendent divine, and then this kind of introjection into the modern. So these are a few of the big obligations that I would try to have any adequate worldview take account of. The metaphysical disorientation of our time, and the kind of groundlessness that pervades contemporary human experience, the deep sense of alienation that affects the modern self in so many ways, the critical need for insight into powerful unconscious forces that are shaping our individual lives and our societies, and that are both creative and destructive, and are having such an impact on the whole planet. And then perhaps the ultimate challenge is for me is we need to understand why did the cosmos, in the form of Homo sapiens and in the form of the modern version of Homo sapiens, disenchant the cosmos? That's like this kind of looming paradox. We need to grasp simply. We need to grasp not simply the ways in which the emerging cosmological vision that we're getting is different from or better than the old mechanistic paradigm. We also need to understand why the cosmos, through the human being and the modern mind and self, brought forth the soulless modern universe in the first place. So that's so immensely, the immensely powerful reductionist vision with its particular set of assumptions and strategies and working principles that came from the Cartesian split. And why would the universe reveal itself to itself as purposeless and meaningless, as ruled by chance and necessity only? What, if any, deeper evolutionary logic might be at work? Because we can't say that we're being integral and holistic and then say, well, everything in the universe is expressive of the all-encompassing cosmos, well, except for reductionist science, or except for Homo sapiens, or except for modern civilization. That somehow is left out. We somehow affirm the whole cosmos, except for this little bit, which happens to be us. We somehow have to get our minds around that one. And the capacity to even be thinking in terms of, well, we affirm everything except for this one really fallen entity or part of the larger whole. That's what emerges. That's one of the things that emerges through the axial age. That seeing things from above and saying, "Hey, there's a critical judgment that we can make about the given and about our own about our own way of being." Because if we say everything except for this little part is somehow outside the whole, that would be a new dualism. It would be, in a sense, a fall without a redemption. I mean, I'm not satisfied with an answer that would say that in the final analysis, modernity is just one huge evolutionary error whose tragedy can only be mourned or at best negated and corrected, but not recognized as being in potentia part of a larger unfolding whole, since after all, we are part of a larger unfolding whole. All right, so that's sort of the challenge that I feel that I at least need to meet, and today, all I can do is, with limited time, and I'll just be giving a kind of some headlines that gesture towards what my thinking would be along this line. I love the quote from Alfred North Whitehead, a very famous one here that I hope I can pull up quickly, where he said let's see if I can get it here. I brought everything. Voila, the very last thing. This is Alfred North Whitehead in Adventures of Ideas. I hazard the prophecy. He's got such a style of writing. It's like so embedded in British, in English literature and tradition. I hazard the prophecy that religion will conquer, which can render clear to popular understanding some eternal greatness incarnate in the passage of temporal fact. Now, I would slightly revise that by saying I hazard the prophecy that mythos or worldview will persuade, rather than that religion will conquer. I'm fine with religion as long as we think of religion in this broader terms, but I will, yeah. But I use the word persuade rather than conquer, really in Whitehead's spirit. He's all about persuasion, both in practice and in theory, than he is about compulsion or conquering. I hazard the prophecy that worldview or mythos or religion will persuade, which can render clear to popular understanding some eternal greatness incarnate in the passage of temporal fact. I think we need a mythos that is as true to the fullness of human experience and to the earth as are the day and night, dawn and sunset, the journey of the sun, the great starry night, and like that to me is the great symbolic container of our experience for all of human history. So I'll just leave it there. I also want to say that any adequate philosophy of history must be, I think, radically mythospeculative in the ways that we've talked about in this course, because the purely theoretic mind cannot help but be dissociated from and unable to access the ontological depths of the mythic archetypal dimension, the symbolic dimension. Again, using solar lunar imagery, it's as if the sun, this differentiating solar principle of great clarity, when one-sided and exaggerated, as in Cartesian rationalist humanism, it dries out the soul-imbued depths of the world as a result of its impersonal abstractions. So we need it to be mythospeculative. It can't be just purely abstract formulations. I'm also very committed to the multiplicity of what we have to draw on to be adequate. there's a play, there's a line in one of Bertolt Brecht's plays where he says, "A man with only one theory is lost. He needs several, 4, lots. He should stuff them in his pockets like newspapers." Totally agree. Now, if we go back to the early hunter-gatherer societies, some of which are not early and are with us today still, but for example, the Pintupi Aborigines in Western Australia, anthropologists there have pointed out that their social life has 3 major structural characteristics or patterns. One is relatedness. 2 is autonomy. Very interesting. Relatedness and autonomy, those kind of classic polarity. And 3rd is a mythic and ritual structure, like the dream time, like the dreaming, that holds both the relating and the autonomy in coherence. And I think that's what a new mythos needs to do vis-a-vis, for the human vis-a-vis the cosmos. This also brings up something our modern mind has not done well, but the postmodern is doing increasingly better with. And that is, I think an adequate philosophy of history has to do better justice to the experience of and the self-interpretation of past epochs and past cultures and other cultures and worldviews other than the modern or Western, or other than the mainstream modern Western, because that includes those that are like mystical traditions or esoteric traditions. We have a tendency to regard, the modern mind has that tendency to regard its clear cognition according to a certain procedural rigor as being superior to everything else, and in some sense true, while others are superstitious or false or primitive or naive. All right. So a few headlines now. I talked about the idea of how through a long, if we look at the evolution of life, how there's been this long, gradual differentiation of a locus of mind and will, or of agency. First, just sentience, discernment, and mobility, and just getting more and more developed. And remember how I went through, for example, from the cellular to the eukaryote animal modes of being, to the mammalian, and then the primate, and then the hominin. Each one brings this kind of revolution in and constant dynamic increase in differentiating and increasing the sense of agency, of cognitive and relational complexity. And there's also been a kind of, if you go back to the process of cephalization, the creation of the head, cephalus, CEPH, like encephalitis, for example, would be refers to the head. So cephalization is the gradual creation or kind of evolution of a of a head in very early animal life. And it's this evolutionary trend which over many generations, the mouth and the sense organs and nerve ganglia, they become concentrated at the front end of the animal and produce the head. And this leads to the formation of a highly sophisticated brain in 3 groups of animals: the arthropods, the cephalopod mollusks, like the octopus or the squid, and vertebrates, which is us. And these have the ability to move using muscles and a body plan with a front end that encounters stimuli first as the animal moves forward, and it's evolved to contain many of the body's sense organs, able to detect light, huge thing. And notice the light imagery that just dominates this, this evolution of our worldview. To detect chemicals, to detect sound. And there's also often a collection of nerve cells that are able to process the information from these sense organs, and this forms the brain. So what I think that process of cephalization, I want to suggest, has kept going in human form after our head, after we're anatomically modern humans. We have a let me just get this little. After we have the modern human, there is the head, as it were, in the metaphoric sense, keeps growing. It keeps getting. You move from, for example, if you can. I wish I somehow could quickly just have the primal worldview here, but you can easily remember the porous self embedded in the anima mundi, the participatio mystique. Okay, very communal, very embedded, not so differentiated from the external, or from the natural environment that it is part of, and that it experiences as being in soul, just like itself. And the identity is completely constituted by the tribal community, which is not just the human beings in it, but it's also the animals and the land, the water, the air, the ancestors and the ancestral spirits and the powerful beings that are resident in every brook and hill and valley. It's that relatively diffuse identity begins to, in the same way that the brain, before the brain really develops, you have nerve nets, like in the jellies, for example, and then you get this brain. Well, in a sense, the tribal consciousness, or the primal consciousness, as I call it, is kind of like a nerve net. And then when you get to the great archaic revolution, you get this, there's the brain, there's the locus of agency, of will and mind that kind of has numinous power in exerting a kind of dominance and direction over the whole. And it's connected to the gods who are in the heavens. So the locus of agency and of numinosity, which go together, keeps elevating and concentrating and magnifying and centralizing, and until it just bursts through in the axial revolution, and then that ultimate locus of agency and mind and will is totally transcendent, except that there is that special relationship to, put this over here, to the prophet, the philosopher, the sage, the mystic, who has, in a sense, is getting an intimation of that big picture there, and then can thereby help transform the society and the world. It starts out being still an enchanted world, and that goes all the way through the medieval period. But gradually, that axial shift so relocates to the transcendent that by the time of the Cartesian and Calvinist Protestant Reformation, Cartesian philosophical revolution, the world's disenchanted, and everything, all sacredness, numinosity, highest locus of value and conscious intelligence, it's the ultimate subject over the object of the world is God. If we're talking about in the European context, and the special, as it were, lieutenant of God, the Cartesian rational mind. Okay, so what I'm suggesting, and also what contributed to that, is not only this gradual cephalization in that sense, but also that idea I talked about. Remember I said that there's the mammalian order that is our close cousin in amongst the I think, what is it, 27 orders of mammals. It's called Scandentia, the tree shrews, and that word Scandentia or Scandentia comes from the same root as the word that gives us ascend, because that's what they are, they're climbers, ascend, but also transcend, and also descend. But that, what I want to suggest is that we are an expression of Scandentia, using that nice kind of Latin with a Greek scando behind it to climb. We ascend, we descend, we transcend, we climb to higher perspectives that get to get an overarching vision of a horizon, to get an overarching meta-narrative, to transcend our objectivity over the earth. That's what happens with the Copernican revolution. There's a great line in Edward Edinger, the wonderful, very insightful Jungian, where he says Copernicus had to transport himself off the earth before he could discover that the sun did not revolve around the earth. That's what every one of us does every time we, through an act of the intellectual imagination and, in a sense, moral imagination, get above, imagine a place above our bodies, our instincts. The fact that I'm really angry right now, so I'm just going to, but instead get above there and say, I'd like to adjudicate this, or I'd like to make a moral assessment of what I'm doing, or I'd like to rethink what I think I'm seeing here, and it could be interpersonal issues, moral issues, but it also can be our sensory perspectives. Maybe the reason that you transcend your subjectivity. It's the phrase in depth psychology is I disidentify from my subjectivity so that I can get a kind of parallax perspective. So the primates, and then this kind of, and then the danger, of course, of, one other thing is we grasp things. Like, think how long we grasp trees and branches. millions and millions of years, far longer than we've been on the savannas or walking around here. I mean, it's just, and how deep that is in us, why we love trees so much, why they're numinous, why they're home, and also how good we got with, I mean, it helped develop our brain tremendously with the visual capacities, and also the grasping and climbing. But I mentioned all the ways in which we continue climbing and transcending and getting visions, et cetera, but we also grasp things, grasp branches, we grasp tools, and then we grasp symbols and concepts and theories that help us transcend. And this is just a crucial vector in human evolution. But with all this transcending and grasping and climbing and et cetera, there is a great danger of a kind of dissociated superiority, of hubris, and of a tragic fall, and also of a kind of negation of the body, of nature, of also other races, and of course other species, and so forth. So that scandentia process, I now want to link in with the idea that the Cartesian-Newtonian mind, which is a big part of this, but not all, because in here is also the Shakespearean self and the romantic subject in the Enlightenment universe, etc. But to the extent that this very powerful, I think, therefore I am moment, see the evolution of identity from the primal, again, put the primal here, the identity is we, right? We are the salmon, we are the river, we are the ancestors, etc. And then it's, as Bella describes, the solitary king, Chinese king in the archaic kingdoms, or the pharaoh, etc. Their relationship to the gods, and the sense that they have this totally pivotal, burdensome connection to the divine, between the divine and the human and the rest of the world. And in the prayers that he discerned this tone of like, I, the one man. It's the burden of it, as well as the I, the one man, like agency, is starting to be differentiated in a very individualized way. And then that breaks free to the ultimate I am who am, I am that am. And then that gets interjected in the modern, I think, therefore I am. And then I always think of the postmodern and Calvin and Hobbes, and Calvin, looking out at the night sky and just saying, I'm significant, screamed the dust speck. Where he perfectly carries that ambiguity in the postmodern of reflexivity. I mean, the postmodern is like hyper-reflexive, hypercritical consciousness, and it recognizes, it's psychological, it sees through itself. At the same time, it has put itself into this self-negated position, but it's also the only game in town. I'm the only critical consciousness in the whole goddamn universe. So carrying that marvelous paradox. The Cartesian-Newtonian, oh, please, Josh. I know I'm throwing out a lot fast here, but.
So when I'm looking at this cycle, the word centralization comes to mind. There's this decentralized nerve net in the tribal consciousness that then takes up these higher orders of localizing. And I just wonder if you've thought much about how complex adaptive systems also tend to, probably for pride too, jump between rungs of decentralization and centralization. So if we look at the brain system went from decentralized, then there was command and control.
Yeah.
And then economic systems, super centralized, now blockchain. There's there seems to be this toing and froing
Yes. Well,
between the center and
yeah, I'm doing. Of course, I'm giving a slightly, a tremendously simplified perspective and leaving out lots of interim stages, such as, for example, the fact that the movement to the monotheistic took place through a kind of defeat of a kind of decentralization because the archaic broke down, and then a new vision would, and a new both cosmology and political social system would emerge that did better justice than the preceding one. So there's a paradigm crisis and a breakdown multiplicity. Now, in addition, what I think you're partly could be referring to is something that I see very much at work here in the postmodern, because everything. One of the reasons I gradually, after about 15 years of drawing these things in kind of more linear sequence and getting a deeper understanding of the postmodern, that I finally realized that the postmodern goes down here, and it's a much richer crucible of transformation. But part of the essence of the postmodern is it's not only a descent from the modern in multiple ways, and it's not only closer, kind of in some sense, reconnecting to the primal with a special sympathy for tribal and indigenous worldviews, et cetera, and reconnecting to nature, to Gaia, et cetera. It is also profoundly opposite in so many ways, the axial. Even though it's carrying the axial inside it, the axial is the one. This is a commitment to the many. This is a commitment to the above, to the below, to the immanent. This is a commitment to and going deep rather than going high. This is a commitment to, this was a very masculine dominated trajectory. Solar masculine symbolism dominated both the image of the human and of the divine. And in the West, it's God, God the Father, etc. And then it's man, modern man. I mean, we all grew up with modern man, modern man. And there's a deep commitment to the feminine in many forms with the postmodern. So the ecological revolution, the feminist revolution, and also the multicultural revolution, all are part of this. That's another part of the multiplicity. And we'll touch on the second axial era a little bit later. So what I want to get across is the idea that the Cartesian Newtonian mind is the apotheosis of the vertebrate brain. And I mean this in two senses. It's, number one, the Cartesian Newtonian mind, which kind of impels and empowers industrial consciousness. It nails the objective world through instrumental reason to understand, explain, predict, control, exploit the material world for the benefit of the human being, or for a particular class of human beings. See, that's the thing to remember, is that there is a strong democratizing tendency in the modern, but there is also what I call a neo-archaic, there's an archaic hierarchy here with modern rational man above everything else. At the top of the hierarchy, and then there's other human beings, and then there's animals, and then higher animals, lower animals, and then plants, and then the elemental mineral world, etc. That there is that implicit archaic hierarchy in this, but the Cartesian Newtonian mindset. I mean it as the apotheosis, meaning on the one hand it's the ultimate, it's a kind of ultimate expression of the mode of consciousness in the vertebrate brain that was basically seeking to discern and act and control or exploit the environment for its own survival and self-enhancement. But I also chose the word apotheosis because that means divinization. And theosis. Apotheosis is like divinizing. It reflects the Cartesian Newtonian synthesis. Remember, not only does Descartes say, only the human mind is in that special relationship to God's, the res cogitans that is shared with God. The rest is just objective, the objective world, res extensa. But it's also Newton. Just think about that incredible couplet from Alexander Pope in the Enlightenment, where he just says, nature's laws lay hid in night. Then God said, let Newton be, and all was light. I mean, that's the new Genesis. He's rewritten the Bible, the Genesis story. The modern is a birth of a new, in a sense, a new God and a new world. And modernity unfolds from that. And that was done not just through this extreme empowerment of instrumental reason through, the calculating, the mathematics, the scientific revolution that put into technological implementation, but it reflects a kind of divinization of the human, particularly the modern rational human, through the introjection of the solar logos. And this is a point I've tried to convey with the idea of when the Copernican revolution happened, the modern mind identified with the sun, and it decathected from the earth. It rose above the earth and said, I understand it. I understand nature. I have all the symbolism that goes back of the sun, the solar logos, Plato's rational divine reason that's identified with the sun. That's the very principle of both rationality and the good that orders the cosmos. It goes back even to Akhenaten, the first monotheistic pharaoh, who was a kind of prelude to monotheism. And it was a solar god that he identified with. He was the solar god. And so he's breaking through the polytheism to the monotheistic solar. And then let there be light, Genesis, or Plato's sun as the divine principle of cosmic reason that orders everything. And we interject that. The Enlightenment, and I think you would have read the incredible quote from Kepler. I think I might have shared it with you at one point or another, where he just feels, now since the dawn, when my speculations have been fully illuminated, I feel that I have seen the true order of the cosmos as revealed by God through me. I've stolen the golden vessels from the Egyptians for my God, and it matters not whether it's recognized by others or by posterity, because God has waited 6,000 years for a witness. He has just felt it come through, and that's why I point to at the same moment the Copernican revolution is happening in Copernicus, Michelangelo is touching, God is touching Adam on the Sistine Chapel, and that's the divine spark that's coming into the human. So that tremendous sense of kind of divinization of the human. So you could see this huge movement. We go from the anima mundi to the gods, to God, to man, and then the descent. And that's where I see us today. And the heliocentric self, I'm suggesting the idea of a heliocentric self is very helpful because it shows our identification with the sun, and it shows us why why the modern self did not feel decentered for so long. Instead, it felt more central than ever because it identified with the divine center of cosmic reason, as well as with I'm leaving out the moral, the close participation in God's will and moral ethos that Christianity and the Protestant Reformation was really impelling, so that gradually, in the course of the modern era, there was more of a sense that we had inside us sufficient moral resources to create a good world. That's why God, this is Charles Taylor's powerful argument, that's why God ceased to be necessary for modernity. It couldn't have been done just through a scientific breakthrough. It had to happen because we gradually got a greater and greater sense of our moral and psychological power with internal moral resources and spiritual resources that were not dependent on an external God, and that is a crucial part of the whole. So let me just wrap up here. As I say, these are headlines. So the idea that the leader focuses attention and intention at each stage. So this leader focuses intention and attention. This leader, capital L, God really focuses intention and attention, as any axial person will tell you, or the Buddha nature, or whatever it happens to be, the divine reason that one should align with in Platonism and Aristotle. And then this leader, our rational moral agency of modernity, that leader focuses attention and intention. I want to emphasize that all along this process, there were evolutionary pressures that were playing a role in in these changes, and those evolutionary pressures. This is an important point. A lot of times, one can think, because evolutionary pressures just push us into something in a kind of reductionist way. But what I want to urge us to consider is that evolutionary pressures can produce or help constellate genuine ontological disclosures in the same way that, let's say, a publishing deadline or a conference that you're supposed to present at, or a master's capstone presentation. It can concentrate the mind and actually open up creativity that wouldn't have been constellated without that pressure. It's a strange thing. I mean, I know it intimately from all the time I was writing Passion of the Western Mind. I had no pressure except I just had to feed my family. But other than that, I didn't have a publishing deadline. I took 10 years, just living very modestly. Praise be a moderate poverty, as Nietzsche said. For he who possesses less is so much the less possessed. But then when Cosmos and Psyche came, they gave me a big contract, said you can just stop teaching for 2 years, write this book now. So I did, but boy, did I have the pressure on me. But to my astonishment, the creativity was intensified, and it really, anyway, it's a kind of paradox, or that I think is part of how evolution works, is that pressures help constellate evolutionary advances that don't just keep us in in the same frame of reference, but actually open up disclosures to other dimensions in the same way that that insects live in an ultraviolet garden that's invisible to us. Well, in the same way, this enormous development has constellated an access to, I believe, to a symbolic world that includes moral values and spiritual insights and dimensions of being that are actual, that they've got ontological substance, and they're not just an epiphenomenal projection for psychological or social convenience. All right, and now just to maybe I think I talked about the stars leading us to wonder. And so I basically see this whole process as kind of like an enormous drama of where we are in a crucial initiatory moment, a crucible of a death rebirth process of a transformation. And to my mind, and psychologically, like Jung's work, life work, starting with the Red Book, and Groff's collected works, they are especially helpful guides for the perinatal process or the death rebirth, holding the tension of opposites, the transcendent function, recognizing symbols of transformation, working with them, and having them work with us. Theodore Parker's great image of the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I've come to agree with that, but a crucial part of that bending is that it bends down. It bends down to there has to be a dethroning, a descent, an ego death. And then we lose our sense of being Mr. or the special species in the entire cosmos. We lose, as everybody does when they face in the spiritual death rebirth process or a confrontation with mortality, they suddenly realize, wow, I'm like everybody else, I'm going to die. And millions have done it before me, and I'm going to die. And it brings you to a state of common humanity and really common kinship with all of nature. And you kind of go through an annihilation of that puffed up specialness, but in going through that annihilation, you access the fact that you are an expression of that cosmic whole, and then you get a new sense of specialness, but it's an embedded specialness that is the cosmic specialness through you, rather than being in the potted plant of your own puffed up egoism. It's a participatory one, and it's completely democratized. And maybe I'll end with the idea that if we are entering the possibility of a second axial era, as drawing on Thomas Berry's ideas about this and Ewart Cousins, and then adding our own, on the one hand, the movement to the transcendent that all those axial religions opened up is now needing to be given a vertical access to the earth and to the recovering the connection to the earth religions, the shamanic religions, the goddess religion, etc. I would also say it's a vertical dimension to the ensouled cosmos, what I would also think of as the cosmic anima mundi, the archetypal cosmos. it is also all the differentiated religious perspectives each one has brought absolutely crucial treasures to the human spirit, and we need all of them. And so the differentiation that happened in the first axial era is now coming into this kind of complex dialogical interplay and a creative syncretism and opening to a much richer interplay. While the first axial era democratized the spiritual dignity of the human, instead of it just being the pharaoh or the king that had that special divine access, any human being, just a carpenter's son or a stonemason, or it could be Socrates or Jesus or Ezekiel, Lao Tzu and so forth. But what our time today seems to be moving towards is a radical democratization, a spiritual democratization of all beings, and to recognize the divine dignity as present in all. And so what I'm imagining here is a kind of, it's not just I wouldn't say this is only the cosmic imagination bringing about this evolution through us. I want to think in terms of a cosmotheanthropic imagination. Too much of what happened in this evolution was experienced as authentically coming from an overwhelmingly transcendent dimension. And that's part of the whole. And so that's why I want to say cosmothe, and then the anthropic, that somehow the human is also has a dignified role in our fate, and now for the Earth's fate. But it's also this immense responsibility and this immense peril, danger of failure, of our shadow overshadowing the Earth. I love Jung's insight that if the apprentice piece of psychological development is the encounter and integration of the shadow, see, that's the shadow of the sun, the masterpiece is the integration and encounter with the anima, which is, if we expand this from just the individual psychology, it's to the anima mundi, to the whole world. So our psychospiritual, ecological drama today is simultaneously confronting our shadow, this solar shadow, and opening up to the ensouled whole. Because I think a kind of long, the universe, I think, has been constellating a partner for the possibility of a hieros gamos, a sacred marriage, differentiating this painstakingly differentiated self, an agent's locus of cognitive and moral relational agency, capacity for self-transcendence to come into relationship with the whole. And I think I am just going to leave it right there. Thanks. Thanks. I apologize for going like that. I guess it was like 1 hour by the time we got really started here. But the OCD part of me would love to have crossed every T and dotted every I, but at least there's some big fence posts out there that give us a sense for what I've been thinking about along these lines. Okay, so do we want to take a break now, or should we sit down together for a few minutes?
What would you like? Do you want to take a break, or do you want to keep?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So
22, 5, a little, 20 minutes from now, let's say. So it'd be like 4:43.